Hello and welcome to the School Leadership Show. First of all, good to see you, Mike. Hi.
Hey, good to see you again.
So glad you're here. But I am truly excited to have Elena Aguilar here today. I believe her third appearance on this podcast. At this point, Elena is a household name among educators, but I'll still share a bit about her. She's been in the field of education a long time. I think we're about the same age. And she's known for her work as a coach, but also for conveying her ideas about coaching, transformation, teacher well-being, PD, teams, and more, just so deeply and so clearly in everything she does, from her blog to her podcast to her books. So I know her, of course, from her tremendous contributions she's made to educational literature. She has written 8 deeply impactful books. And even though I only summarize a very few books every year, and only the best and the brightest, I believe I've summarized 4 of her books so far: The Art of Coaching Teams, Onward, Cultivating Emotional Resilience in Educators, the PD book, 7 Habits that Transform Professional Development, and now today we're going to talk about Arise, the Art of Transformational Coaching. But first, I just want to step out of my podcast role for a moment and just to say that when I work with principals through workshops, PD, and my masterminds, I absolutely use your ideas that are just so well conceived and well tested. And what I see in your work, Elena, is a rare combination of inspiration, understanding, and practicality. So I read what you have and I feel inspired, but then it doesn't stop there. Then you've got like a tool or some very specific language I can use when I work with principals. And then you write as if you understand that teachers are real people. They're not just putting on these roles that they come to school with. And so you have this holistic approach to teachers, educators in general. So I really think so. Inspiration, understanding, and practicality. That sounds like a few things we could all use a little more of right now. But anyway, sorry to get all gushy on you. I'm a huge fan, and welcome to the School Leadership Show, Elena.
Oh, thank you so much. Words mean a lot. That really resonates. And that is my hope and my intention, is to provide both inspiration to convey my understanding, because I did work in the Oakland public schools for 20 years, and to provide practicality. Here's something you can do tomorrow, today. Here's a new thing you can say, you can try, you can respond in this way. So that means a lot to hear that you received it that way.
Oh, good. That's good to hear. Well, first, all right, so let's talk about Arise, your latest book, The Art of Transformational Coaching. And this is a big book. It's not just the size, it's over 450 pages, but in scope. So can you share with us what led you to write this book when you already had 7 successful books out there?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this book feels like the culmination of 30 years working in education. And I probably would even expand that and say, and 55 years on this planet, because I think it is a book in which I pushed the boundaries of what it means to be an educator into our full humanity, even more than I did in any of my previous ones. It is a book that in many ways references the content of other books, but takes it deeper, because I just wrote it in after writing the first book 15 years ago. And so it takes the ideas from my first book, The Art of Coaching, and really refines them and polishes them and makes them even more useful. And ideas from Onward and ideas from Coaching for Equity and Teams and all of it. So I don't think it's redundant. I think there's a lot of new content. In one of the things that I've learned so much about, I would say in the last 15 years, is about the experience of being a human and having emotions, and how do you coach emotions? How do you coach educators to be resilient? How do we think about teacher retention in a different way and connect that to emotions? And again, like, what are the practical things you say when you sit down to meet with a teacher and talk about their unit design and they just can't stop crying? And they're saying, I'm so overwhelmed. I can't do this. I didn't think it was going to be this hard. I don't think I can finish out the year. What do you say at that point? How do you respond? And how do you respond again in a way that cultivates resilience and contributes to retention, and not just sort of a sympathizing or consoling in the moment, because that's necessary, but it's not enough. And so that's content that I've learned so much about. And that I also, in that learning, realized there was so much I did not get as a human being, as a child, as a student, about how to engage with emotions. And so I think there's a lot of knowledge that educators need, just even what is an emotion and how can we think about them in different ways than what we've been taught and trained, good and bad, and repress or manage or regulate. I have a different way of talking about emotions. And so that's new content in there. And it's content that obviously is sprinkled throughout my other books, but I go into much more depth and much more specificity about how to respond. So I wrote this book because initially I planned on revising my first book, The Art of Coaching. And as I started that revision, I just realized I'm writing a whole new book. This is slightly different contextual framing. It's organized differently. It's more useful. It's more applicable. The funny thing about writing is that you put all your ideas out there, and then 5 or 10 years later, you're like, oh, I kind of have some different ideas now, but that's in print. And I've had the incredible opportunity to keep writing and then to say, like, no, that one's no longer what I want to be out in the world. And so The Art of Coaching is out of print now. And now, if you want the book that I think everybody should read about, I would say it's not just coaching. I think ultimately the way that I want to be remembered for my contribution in the field of education is someone who helped people learn how to communicate more effectively with others and learned how to create the conditions in which they thrived and in which other people thrive. It is a much more expansive sense that I have of my work. And so those could be coaches, they could be school leaders. Almost every time I do a workshop, I have people attend who are not in education. I did one last week and there was a nurse there who said, my cousin has read your work and thought it would be really helpful. And she said, this is incredible. I can use all of this immediately. And again, I think that's because of the emphasis on communication, on starting with what is most within your sphere of control, which is who you are being, your disposition, your attitudes, your thoughts. That is something we can do something about in our work and in our lives. And I can tell people specifically how to have more of an impact in those areas. So I'll stop there. That's a lot.
No, that's great. And it really does feel like a culmination of so much of your work. I can't even imagine what you'll produce next after this. But it is that people part, that emotions and that people part that I think is so applicable across fields. And also, like you said, just, our listeners are school-based and district-based leaders, and they shouldn't turn this off because they think, oh, I'm not a coach. I think what you said about it's really about how do you communicate and how do you create the conditions so all of the educators can thrive, you as well as the teachers, the leaders, the staff, and those are huge. I hate to start with the negative, but I'm wondering, given this huge focus on people, what do you see when leaders are trying to make change as some of the biggest mistakes that they make, in not addressing some of these areas that you're talking about? I assume this comes from you, like you said, in some ways you're not sure you felt so supported or thriving, or are there some quick mistakes that you think leaders are making?
Yes. And I say this, and I want to quickly say, and I understand why they make these mistakes. And so I just want to preface all of this with understanding and compassion. I think the number one mistake is going too fast. Too fast of a rollout, too fast of a timeline, it's just too fast, too fast, too fast. And leaders in schools are under tremendous pressures to institute change, to implement new initiatives and policies that will improve certain data points and so on and so on. And so I acknowledge that. And there are ways that even within those pressures, leaders can slow down and can minimize. And so literally that is like, you are planning a staff meeting for next week, plan it and then cut half of it. And instead of what you had planned, give people 6 minutes in the beginning to talk to each other and tell a story about a bright spot in the last week. And what those 6 minutes do is help people continue to strengthen the neural pathways which notice and record the good things that are happening. So that's an antidote to our brain's negativity bias. 6 minutes of storytelling between two people boosts oxytocin between them. That's the bonding hormone. It makes them like each other. We work in places where we have people that we like and we connect with. And so all of the content that I write about and teach is research-based. I'm really big into I want to know the why. I want to know the science and the social science and tell me why we should do this. And there is a lot of research on the positive impact of storytelling. And so I say that with sort of an intuitive, yes, we like stories, human beings, stories, goes back a long ways. And we also I can make a very compelling case for why you should cut 10 minutes of what you were going to be doing and just saying, put it in an email or communicate it some other way if it's just information to get across and give people a chance to connect to each other. And that centers their humanity, collective, emotional intelligence of a group or a team. And it slows the pace down a little bit.
Does everybody see what Elena just did? So I asked a somewhat negative question. And so because of her great respect for all educators, she didn't throw leaders under the bus. She turned it positive and she gave a very practical idea about cutting your content and adding 6 minutes of a connecting story. So that is what her writing is like. So you should, if you like that tidbit, go read all of her books. But yes, I think that's a great important point, right? 60 minutes of content where no one feels connected or present or even open and trusting is getting nothing, whereas 54 minutes of content after that very short activity will bring people into the learning. So I love that, and thanks for bringing it positive. But so we're supposed to be focusing on Arise specifically, and I'm wondering if you can talk about this term transformational coaching and what you mean by that.
Sure. So I started coaching 20 years ago. And at that point, I was coaching new teachers. I had a very little bit of training and coaching and doing that, like a few afternoons. And then I would go to meet with the teachers and sort of the anecdote I gave, I'd sit down to help them analyze data or plan their curriculum. And they just couldn't stop crying. And they were overwhelmed. And all these issues were coming up, which had at the center their emotional experience, their ability to respond to stress, also had at the center their questions about their identities and what it meant for them to be teaching in a context in which they hadn't grown up and so on. And I just didn't really know what to do to respond because I felt like, wait, we're supposed to be talking about this data. And now you're kind of wiping away your tears and gasping through this conversation, but I know you're not really getting anything. And as I moved into a full-time instructional coach position and began to acquire more coaching strategies, I just kept feeling like something is missing here. And so I started incorporating additional strategies, things that I just read or I heard or, from here and from there outside of work. And they worked. And they worked in terms of coaching teachers. And it worked to ask a teacher, tell me about your values. What's really important to you? How does that show up in your interactions with students? Working with teachers on what felt like what is really basic emotional intelligence, but I didn't get it as a kid. They didn't get it as a kid. I keep saying, maybe we get some of this stuff if we go to therapy or we read some books or something, but it's a skill set to build. And it is something that shows up over and over and over for teachers and for leaders. So basically, over the course of a dozen years or so, I really developed a whole approach to coaching. I was able to implement that model in my final years in the Oakland schools. I was an administrator. I had a team of coaches, and we implemented it in some middle schools. And so I could see the impact it had on teacher retention, on student experience and outcomes. And that was what led me to write my first book, The Art of Coaching. And the core concept of transformational coaching is that in order to enact transformational change, we have to coach on the levels of behaviors, which is familiar to everyone, the things that we do, but also on the underlying beliefs and on someone's ways of being, which includes their emotions. And so this concept that I call the 3 Bs, behaviors, beliefs, and ways of being, is at the core of this model. And so it means that when we are coaching a teacher, we're listening for when there are opportunities to surface and explore the underlying beliefs. And so every single action we take comes from a belief that we hold. We may be conscious of it, we might be unconscious of it. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's just how we function as humans. But what we want to do is be able to surface those and say, is this belief that's resulting in this behavior serving the outcomes we're here for, which is the well-being of children and their learning? Is this belief in any way undermining you as a teacher, as a human, as a leader? And so we listen for opportunities to explore beliefs, as well as this whole domain of the way of being. And that's where all the stuff around emotions comes in.
Can I poke at the beliefs for a second? So I think about Guskey's work where, when you're trying to get teachers to change a practice, that trying to get them to believe in it first before they've seen its efficacy is not as effective as getting them to see the efficacy of the strategy and then they believe in it. How do you square those two things? Or are they just, we're moving down parallel tracks? What do you think about that?
Well, I mean, I think it's a chicken and an egg question, right? It's like, what comes first? And I think that's like, it's worth just saying, yeah, this is a chicken and an egg. Like sometimes, you need to, I mean, what I'm addressing is that most of us operate from unconscious beliefs. And when they are unconscious, they usually sabotage us. Not always, I would say, but some of them really do sabotage us. We at least want to be clear on why am I doing this? And then I can make an intentional choice. And so a reaction to a student who is always rolling her eyes at you. What is the belief that you hold about eye rolling or respect or authority? And sometimes a teacher, I've seen teachers respond to students rolling their eyes where the teacher says, I'm really proud of you. I can see that to the student. I can see that you're working to manage your response. That's great. Okay, that's a rare response. But that's a response. A teacher holds a belief that a student rolling her eyes is actually a regulation, a management of emotion strategy, right? The student is angry, is frustrated, and rather than cursing at that teacher or doing whatever else she might do, she rolls her eyes. That's wonderful. I've seen teachers be like, I'm so proud of you for rolling your eyes today. And then, of course, there's all the other teachers who are like, and that's a warning. Go to the office. That's the 3rd time today. That is disrespectful. You don't do that to you. So what's the underlying belief there about eye rolling and respect? And so if we want to look, for example, at student discipline data, and we want to track this back to like, okay, so what happened before this and before this and before this, we do have to get into talking about our beliefs and kind of excavating them and saying, how is this helping us? How is it serving kids?
That idea of behavior as communication, I think, is lost on a lot of educators. I think, folks who work in special education settings with particularly challenging kids get that, right? When they get just a little bit of movement on the behavior. So how do you go after that with folks who, view that eye rolling as disrespect and disruptive to the educational process?
Mm-hmm. I mean, the first step is to excavate the belief and to then help someone recognize that a belief is not truth. It's just a belief. And people can hold different beliefs about things. Maybe you believed in Santa Claus when you were little, and then you stopped believing in Santa Claus because you saw a new data set. And so we want to kind of help people recognize that our mental models are part of being a human, but we want to hold them with some lightness, some spaciousness, and we want to interrogate them because so many of the beliefs that we hold, that we've been conditioned into, that we're even unconscious of, are beliefs that are reflective of bigger belief systems that we actually may not want to be replicating. And so we may say, oh, actually, I realize I'm acting this way, but I truly actually don't believe in that. And so that's when a coach's skill at creating cognitive dissonance, which is within someone's window of tolerance, and being able to help them unpack it and normalize. Yes, this makes sense that you hold this belief for these reasons, and let's construct a new belief. And so a transformational coach can use tools like the ladder of inference. There's other tools that I offer in my book, and I did not create the ladder of inference, but there's other tools that we can draw on to help people deconstruct their beliefs and construct new ones. But I think the first step in any change is awareness. You have to be aware you're making a choice, and then you can explore what's the impact of that choice, the intended consequences, unintended. And then you have an opportunity to say, do I want to keep making that choice to enact that behavior or something else?
And I think that I mean that's important for coaching and also for PD, right? That we often aim PD at behaviors, but we don't think about the beliefs and the ways of being as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, this.
I'll tell you a story when this was a huge light bulb for me. I was coaching teachers on a cycle. So it was 3 months. And I coached a teacher, a seventh grade English teacher. When I originally walked into her class, her desks were in rows, students were silent. She stood up at the front. They read from a textbook. It was like, that's what it was. And I worked with her for 3 months. And she got invested in doing small group work, moved the chairs around. They were in little groups that were using protocols, that were talking to each other. And I thought, this is great. Like, check that off my list. I'm done. She's done. We're all good here. So I left. And then 3 months later, I came back to work with her again and walked into the classroom, and the desks were back in rows, and it was absolutely silent. And I had a good relationship with her. And afterwards, I just kind of said, like, what happened? What happened? Of course, I was like a blow to my ego, and I was having all these, like, I'm a failure. And she said, Elena, I thought about it and I realized I just don't believe that students need to be in small groups and talking to each other in order to learn. And she said, and they're middle schoolers, they're noisy. And so I just went back to what always worked. But it was her use of the phrase, I just don't believe. And I was like, oh, yeah. So all that behavioral change did not stick because the underlying belief system hadn't shifted. And so it was then when we started excavating, like, yeah, what are your beliefs about how you learn, how students learn, what are the conditions? And then, of course, like, yeah, we can look at the research, and that was a data set. But it was that, like, right, what long-term sustainable change, not change that's just temporary or for compliance behaviors, but really long-term change takes a shift in mindset.
And probably when teachers don't follow through, it is often something like what you're talking about. I think about the Dan and Chip Heath quote, which is, "What often looks like resistance is just a lack of clarity." But in this case, it's what often looks like teacher resistance is often lack of belief system, lack of a shift in mindset. And I think that probably for most leaders, the behavior of your three B's, behavior, beliefs, and ways of being, behaviors are the lowest hanging fruit. So that's why we all go after them, right? So if I observe your class and it took you 8 minutes to transition the kids from the rugs back to their desks, that's very easy for me to talk about that as a behavior. But obviously, getting at the beliefs and the ways of being is much more nuanced and difficult. And people should look in the book because you do have sample coaching conversations and language for people to use because it is more nuanced. Mike, you look like you wanted to say something. No, yes.
Yeah, I was thinking about this. The three of us on this call are of the same ilk in terms of our time in the system as educators. And I'm just wondering, Elena, as I continue to hire people who are the age of my oldest daughter, I feel like I'm seeing generational differences, but I feel like every generation says that. Am I? Like, what do you think do you think that that's playing into any of this? Is the next generation of educators coming through more receptive to those sort of progressive beliefs, less receptive? Are you seeing any patterns?
That's a great question. Um, and it's funny because so many people talk about like I'm finding myself doing the same thing, like, oh, those young people, that's a young those and with a little bit of disdain at times or frustration. And actually, I find that the young people, I mean, I have students that I taught who are now into their 15th year of teaching, and it's like, wow. Um, but I think that there has been so much, I would say, progress in the realm of valuing and validating that we are human beings. Human beings have emotions. Let's talk about emotions. Let's attend to them. Let's, I mean, I can't sometimes I'm just shocked by how much has changed even the last 25 years. I feel like 25 years ago, the only people who I knew who went to therapy were the ones who really needed some support. And it was still kind of like, oh, why would you go? That's only like if you're in crisis or something. And now I feel like so many people, myself included, are like, yep, I'm going to therapy in an hour and I can't wait for therapy and like therapy this and that, and it's a big shift in the way that we talk about not just mental health, but emotional well-being and relationships and connections with others, and the number of, you know, podcasts and books and people on social media who are talking about rest and boundaries and relationships and all of that. I feel like that has changed so much. And so I do find some of I mean, it's an interesting thing because some of the newer, younger educators, there's a continuum, right? We want to include emotions and talk about them. And then we're also here to get something done. And we're here to ensure that children learn. And when there is an 8-minute transition period in a classroom, it is absolutely totally appropriate and important for a coach or a school leader to say, 8 minutes transitioning in is too long. Let's see if we can get this down to 90 seconds. Let's practice. Let's do that again. When you're doing that from a transformational coaching stance, you do that kind of sort of direct instruction modeling. And then afterwards, you include some opportunities for the teacher to reflect on some of the elements that address that beliefs and ways of being. And so I don't want to also communicate that a transformational coach is only focusing on these sort of bigger, more sometimes abstract concepts like beliefs and ways of being, because we co-plan, we model lessons, we give feedback on lesson plans, we analyze data, but we do it in a way that cultivates all kinds of skills, including reflection skills and decision making and emotional self-regulation and management and so on.
I appreciate that you bring all that up because you probably get some resistance from people who say, whether they're coaches or leaders, I'm not a therapist, right? I'm not a therapist. I have time for this. And we talked earlier about carving out the time to attend to needs so that you can get the content done. And so I appreciate all these examples. And, I don't know if we jumped right into transformational coaching, but one of the things that you say in your book is that coaching teachers is the greatest leverage point in transforming our educational system. Mm-hmm. And just the idea that don't belittle this attention to emotions or this attention to one conversation at a time, because that's really the only way that we are going to change anything. You're not going to bring in a foolproof curriculum. You're not going to bring in a foolproof schedule, a foolproof assessment, but it's the people who are going to change the system. So it's how we treat and interact and grow the people that we have. So mm-hmm. I appreciate you saying that. I wanted to get a little bit granular. So you talk about sort of three I don't know, steps, phases, I'm not sure, of transformational coaching, where you listen, you think, and you respond. And there's great ideas in the book about listening and responding, but both listening and talking, you can hear that, or you can read about that in a lot of other books about coaching. And they're great ideas. People should read them. But for the limited time, I'm sort of interested in the think part, where you suggest a number of very helpful tools to help the person doing the coaching either better understand the teacher or better know how to work with the teacher. And so, I mean, you had mentioned the ladder of inference, which isn't yours, you say, but I'm wondering if we could talk a little bit about the spheres of influence and the gaps framework as two tools that people could walk away with. So if you are a leader out there working with a teacher, could you explain, or another leader, how to use this? First of all, what is the spheres of influence and how to use it?
Sure. And I'll say just before that, the concept of having a thinking step is just to bring some awareness to, especially for leaders who are hearing so many people talking to them, at them every day. And that moment of what am I going to say? How do I respond? And how do I respond in a way that might be, I'm really invested in figuring out efficient, strategic ways to get to the goals that we're here for. And so being able to intentionally make a choice that might have the impact that ultimately you want it to have is what happens in the thinking stage. And it really is like you see a problem, you see a challenge, and you've got a whole bunch of tools in front of you. You don't just immediately reach for the hammer because that's what you always use and you're really comfortable with it. Sometimes you need to reach for a different tool. So the spheres of influence and control is a very simple concept that I did not create either, which posits that there are a whole lot of things that are outside of our control. There is a lot that we can influence, and there's a little bit that's within our control. And so if first we can make that distinction about a situation we're in, this framework is useful to use when someone is frustrated, maybe when they're complaining, when they're just in a challenging situation. Using this framework as a way to make a choice about what to do or how to respond to a situation is how it's most useful. And so there's so much that we cannot control. I like to say there's a lot we can influence, and the key is we can make a choice about what we influence. And so, for example, a teacher could say, could be venting or complaining about their work life and including that, a teacher's salary, they just can't live in this area. They can't imagine having a family in this salary. You could say, well, that is outside of your control. But I often say, but it's also something if you choose, you could influence. If you want to dedicate your life to traveling the path of working on teacher salaries, you might be able to influence that, but you make a conscious and intentional choice about where. So if you feel like, no, I don't want to make that choice, then put it in the bucket that's outside of your control. What is within our control? Because everybody's like, what is within our control? Is there anything? Yes, I would say your thoughts are within your control. And our thoughts have a tremendous impact on our feelings, on our emotions. And so we can learn a lot of strategies to have thoughts that help us feel good and thrive. And so this is a concept that anybody can use for themselves. And I often introduce it saying, like, just think about a complaint you're having about work right now. Like, I don't have enough time. I have so much to get done. I'm never going to finish. And then start sorting through all the different elements and deciding which one's outside of your control, which one do you want to influence, which one's within. And then you can prioritize and make a choice about where you want to direct your energy. And a leader or a coach can use that same kind of sequence of questions with someone that they're talking to who comes to them and says that, they're so frustrated and this, and just saying, I hear that there's a lot going on and this sounds really challenging. And I'm curious, within everything you've shared with me, what feels like it's most within your control? And just seeing what awareness there is. What's within your influence? What do you want to influence? And the thing is that people often very quickly get to the place where they say, well, I guess the only thing that I can control is my attitude. And so I'm going to work on that. And sometimes that's good news and it's bad news when things are really hard. But it is, it's like, that's all that's in your control. How you're seeing something, the stories you're telling, the conclusions you're coming to, what is within your control is the choices you make about how you expend your energy. And so that's a fairly easy concept to engage with.
And it also, I'm not sure I realized this before, but it hits a few of the B's, right? So imagine if I'm coaching someone and we're sitting side by side, maybe with a physical piece of paper with, some circles about what you can control, what you can influence. they're probably thinking you've given them a tool to think about their problem differently, right? You're complaining about what you can't control, right? That's a whole way of thinking about the problem, but then also, but I could change these thoughts or these behaviors. So I like how it addresses a few of those. So yeah, and that's something anybody listening, you could literally use that tomorrow when you're talking with someone. You could use the spheres of influence. And then just another one to pick it out. I really like your gaps framework. Can you share a little bit, and we'll end there. I know Mike doesn't like to go over about the gaps framework and how coaches and leaders can use that in their work.
Yes. So the gaps framework is also one that I didn't develop the original concept. It's a very simple concept. I kind of built on it. And it is, I would say, one of the primary concepts that I think through because it is about learning. And so imagine that a teacher comes to you, and again, perhaps they are complaining and they're having a really hard time. And, this curriculum is too hard for our kids. There's too much language in it. It's a great science curriculum and it has so much potential, but we have so many multilingual learners and they can't access it. And I am an 8th grade science teacher and I did not learn how to teach English learners. And it's just it's too much. And the old curriculum that I developed for years really worked. And I have spent 15 years teaching that. And I'm frustrated that I have to teach this new curriculum. And so I'm listening through this lens of what are the gaps? And so the options for gaps are skill, knowledge, will, capacity, emotional intelligence, and cultural competency. And a lot of times, leaders and coaches hear what they think of as will gaps. Like, oh, this teacher just doesn't want to teach this. And that's tangled up with resistance, which is my favorite thing to talk about. But they hear like, oh, this is a will gap. She's unwilling. And say, true will gaps are really, really rare. What I hear in that example that I just gave is a teacher who has knowledge gaps. They don't have the knowledge they need to make a text-heavy science or math curriculum accessible to multilingual learners. They don't have the skills. They don't know what it is to front-load vocabulary. They never learned that because they came in through a secondary path and so on. Maybe they have some cultural competency gaps. Maybe the emotional intelligence gaps are around their levels of frustration and their ability to engage with that. They've met their learning edge. So a gap is an area for growth. It's not a deficit. And so the way I use this, I often introduce it to people. And so they have the concept. And then I normalize that we all have gaps. And I'll say something like, as I'm listening to you, I'm realizing that I think you just have some knowledge gaps and probably some skill gaps too. And that's really great news because I know you can close your gaps, right? You've closed so many before. And so sometimes you get a little bit of a look like, like a little bit of confusion, sort of, are you saying I don't know how to do something? And I'm like, yes, that's exactly what I'm saying. And that's so normal because all of us have areas for growth. So let's start working on it. It's not resistance. It's just things are going so fast and programs are implemented really fast and people don't get the training and they don't know how to do this and they're afraid of change and new things and they want to do what they've always done because it's comfortable. So it's just a gap.
So I don't think we can let this podcast end without talking about one quote from the book that Jen pulled out that I adore. And you wrote, "No one can learn from you if you think they suck." You want to talk more about that?
Yes. And it's so funny because that was in my first book and it's the most often quoted passage. And it was actually my coach, Leslie Pletner, who said that to me. And so often people quote it and I'm like, it was Leslie, not me. And it was in a moment where I was so frustrated with teachers that I was coaching. And that's what she said to me. And it was just the biggest like earthquake in my brain was like, oh, that's right. I have been thinking all these teachers suck. They're just, I just had all kinds of negative conclusions and assumptions that I was making. And no, of course, they can't learn from you because we are human beings and human beings need each other. We're social creatures and we don't thrive, we don't learn, we don't grow when we are faced with judgment and criticism. And that's, in some ways, that's why this like the language and the tone around the gaps feels important to me because it's normalizing. We've all got areas for learning and growth. And I'm here with you. That's what a coach does is, ideally that's what a leader does. Like, these are the expectations. This is where we're going. Here's the plan for how to get there. And now I'm going to walk along with you and I am going to give you feedback. And sometimes it might sting a little bit. And I care about you and I'm curious about your response. And I recognize that I am not in the classroom with 180 middle schoolers every day. And so let's walk this path together. I think it's like that quote is exactly about our way of being. And are we engaging from a place of judgment and criticism or from a place of curiosity and compassion and humility and courage? And I would say Jen, you were saying like the master schedule is not going to change schools. It's not going to be what transforms. It's not going to be a new curriculum. It's not going to be AI. It's not going to be some new way to track data and analyze data because we are human beings and the way that we relate to each other and the way we think and feel about each other is always going to be in the center. And when we can connect around a shared purpose and a goal, and it's really important that that is clear, like where are we headed? And what is everybody expected to do? And what happens if we don't do what we're expected to do? But then we can walk along that path with a little bit more listening and curiosity and compassion. Things could be really different.
Yeah. And I think that last quote and that last part that you said, we didn't get to everything in your book, but there's a huge piece about how we need to work on ourselves as coaches, as leaders, and their dispositions that you outline. And, what does it take for our own behaviors, beliefs, and ways of being to coach and influence other people well in a way that they thrive and we thrive. So it's a huge book. We only talked about a little bit. Is there any burning piece that you want to get out there before we say goodbye about this book?
Oh gosh, I think, I just appreciate how you reflected back what you got out of it. And I do feel like there's so much that's practical and applicable. There's one of my favorite sections is called All We Need is 15 Minutes. And I can make a case for conversations that are absolutely transformative in 15 minutes. I have them all the time with educators. And sort of on the other end of the continuum of what I think this book is about, I feel like I am explicit in this book more than anything else that I've done anywhere around. I really think we need to be returning to centering love in our work and in our conversations and in our orientation. And if we can balance the sort of practicality and the skills that go into a 15-minute conversation with centering love and moving and grounding ourselves in a place of love more often, we'd have really different schools and communities.
Thank you. And that is absolutely something we need right now. And so I really encourage people to pick up a book if you're feeling like that is something that your school community could need, centering love and the needs of the humans, the people. That's really where we need to be. So thank you so much. Of course, Elena has been in such demand from all of her coaching, facilitation, and everything that she started an organization, I'm not sure we mentioned it, called Bright Morning. So maybe would you just leave people with a little bit about Bright Morning and where they can learn more about you and your work?
Sure. So the website is brightmorningteam.com, and we have a huge array of services that teach you how to thrive and teach you how to create schools and communities in which people are thriving.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. Thank you so much for your time. We know you're so busy. Everything you said here is just resonates, and I think will resonate for so many people. So you are doing tremendous work for our field right now. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the School Leadership Show, a podcast for aspiring and practicing school leaders. Send your comments, questions, and show ideas to me, Mark@schoolleadershipshow.com. And please consider rating the podcast in iTunes and leaving a comment. And definitely pass the show along to your